Don't go back home.
Saying that, my grandmother tightly grasped my arm.
The child is in your belly. It's frightened. It's dangerous. Don't go back.
I had returned to my parents' home to announce my pregnancy. My family had celebrated, and it was time for me to return to my husband's home. That was when my grandmother made her plea. "Grandma, what's wrong?" My grandmother had advanced dementia and shouldn't have recognized me. I was perplexed as my grandmother, who always just gazed out into the garden, suddenly raised her voice. "I'm sorry, Grandma. I'll come back again." Today was my wedding anniversary with my husband. I had been thinking about buying a cake to take home. I felt sorry for my grandmother, but I didn't have time to listen to her ramblings in her condition.
No, someone stop her, please.
I left my parents' home with a sense of guilt at my grandmother's desperate state. Later, I regretted it instantly. If I had believed my grandmother's words, I could have avoided such a frightening situation. The story goes back a little while. I'm just an ordinary housewife, married to Sam for 5 years. We had been trying to have a child since the beginning of our marriage, so this year I thought we could celebrate a wonderful 5th anniversary. However, things didn't go as smoothly as I had hoped. One of the problems was that we started fighting more often after the pregnancy was confirmed. Of course, my morning sickness and anxiety were also contributing factors. I was confused by the situation of having a life other than my own growing inside me, and I couldn't be sane about it. What's more, the problem was not only my nervousness, but also Sam's. At first, I thought he was feeling anxious and nervous about my pregnancy, as I had heard that men tend to feel that way in these situations. I wanted to face it with Sam, even if we clashed. Unfortunately, it seems that Sam didn't share my thoughts. He was more nervous about my role as a housewife than our child. Previously, he rarely complained about my housework. I thought that, being a somewhat careless person, he wouldn't mind if I slacked off a bit. However, since I became pregnant, he complained about me not being able to do chores smoothly.
Don't slack off. Just because you were pregnant.
He would complain about everything, like the seasoning being too strong or the laundry having wrinkles. I admit there are times when my husband is right, and I hadn't done things properly. However, it's frustrating to be criticized when he was never experienced morning sickness. Honestly, there are times when I'm not thorough enough, and I've been cutting corners with household chores from time to time. I thought we worked so well together because we're both a bit sloppy with chores. If he had complained from the start, it would have been one thing. But why did he suddenly change his attitude now? And why does he only bring this up now that I'm pregnant? Is it really all my fault? I wonder how other pregnant women manage their lives without causing troubles. While I keep asking myself these questions, Sam doesn't seem to reflect on his behavior at all. To make matters worse, he's began going out to eat and coming home drunk more often. Maybe he's also worried about having his first child. And maybe he's sorting out things because he's been holding back from being intimate at night due to my pregnancy. I try to overlook my husband's behavior, but my stress level was undoubtedly increasing. And there was one more thing weighing heavily on my mind: telling my family about my pregnancy. I told my parents about it over the phone, but I still needed to tell them in person. However, I had distanced myself from my family for personal reasons and hadn't visited them in a long time. My parents, aunt, and grandmother lived there, with my grandfather having passed away over a decade ago. Although I get along well with my parents and aunt, I've never been particularly close to my grandmother. In fact, My grandmother has a strange ability that has caused me bitter memories since childhood. She has prophetic dreams about her blood relatives. She doesn't deliberately see the future like in anime or manga. Sometimes, she just suddenly has a prophetic dream. But for some reason, she can distinguish it from a regular dream. In reality, some relatives have succeeded in their business or avoided danger because of her dreams. When I was a child, I was fascinated by the fairy tale-like events I heard about, and I admired my grandmother for using her power to help people. But children can be cruel. And when I told my friends about it, I was immediately branded a liar. If she had such a useful power, why couldn't she save me? Of course, I now understand that my grandmother was not at fault, and that ultimately I was the one to blame. So, since then, I didn't know how to interact with my grandmother anymore. Over time, I became distant from my family and rarely visited home. Eventually, my grandmother developed dementia, and I was never able to apologize or explain myself to her. Now, on a happy occasion, I returned home to visit my family. I didn't want to feel guilty anymore, so I went to see my grandmother. When I arrived, my parents and aunt welcomed me warmly. But my grandmother just stared out the window, saying nothing. According to my aunt, she had been like this lately. "Hi, Grandma. I'm home." I spoke to my grandmother, but there was no response from her. After that, I updated my parents and aunt on my recent news, from my pregnancy to complaints about my husband, and trivial things. Recently, I had been at odds with Sam, so talking to someone like this gave me a sense of relief. I thought it was a good decision to come here. If I ever feel anxious again, coming back to my parents' house might be a good idea. And if I'm lucky, I might be able to see Grandma when she's conscious. We chatted and laughed, and before we knew it, time had flown by, and the sun was setting. Oops, it's already this late. Actually, today is my wedding anniversary, and I was planning to buy a cake on my way back to celebrate with my husband. If we take the time to have a proper conversation as a couple, maybe my husband's attitude will soften. Well, I have somewhere to stop by, so I'll be going soon. Then, just as my parents got up to see me off,
You can't leave.
during the time we were chatting, my grandmother, who had been staring at the garden in silence, suddenly spoke up. We fell silent together. My aunt asked her in a surprise,
What's wrong, Mom?
but my grandmother didn't say anything in return. It's not like my grandmother never talks at all, but she might have had a moment of consciousness. I can't say I'm not curious about what my grandmother said, but it's our wedding anniversary today, so I want to go home soon. When I tried to leave, my grandmother spoke up again.
No. The child is frightened of your husband.
Child? Husband? What on earth is she talking about? Apparently, when you have dementia, past memories can come back vividly. Maybe she's mistaken something. Or could it be that strange ability of hers? I had a bad feeling about it. Thoughts about that came to my mind, and I wanted to leave the place right away. The memory of being looked down upon as a liar and strange by everyone flashed back. I didn't want to get involved with my grandmother anymore. I said goodbye quickly and left my parents' house and returned home where Sam was already back from work. I forgot to buy a cake on my way back, and I was preoccupied with what my grandmother said. Anyway, I have to prepare dinner now. Hey Sam, I'm sorry. I went to my parents' house today. I'll make dinner right away. Then, my husband showed a different attitude than usual. Normally, he would sit at the table and watch TV until the meal was ready. But he came into the kitchen this time. Then he put his hands on my waist and tried to touch me. I was surprised by his sudden action. But honestly, I am happy that he sees me as a woman. But it's not possible now. The doctor told me not to engage in such activities during this time. Sam, I'm sorry, but it's not okay. Not now. I said that. But he didn't seem to want to leave me. Furthermore, he grabbed my arm and tried to move me from the kitchen to the bedroom. Until now, Sam had never forcefully grabbed my arm like this before. Suddenly, he felt like a stranger rather than my husband, and I was scared. I desperately tried to get away from my husband, but he still didn't back down. I couldn't do anything and found myself shouting for help. That was when it happened. Suddenly, the sound of the entrance opening could be heard, and someone came in.
What are you doing, Sam?
That was my father who pulled Sam away from me. My mother was beside him. Mom, Dad, why are you here? I asked the two of them.
Your grandmother told us.
The truth is this. Ever after I went home, it seemed that my grandmother had raised her voice many times at home.
The baby is in her belly is in danger. It's frightened of the husband. The husband is evil.
My aunt thought that my grandmother's words were clear, and that her consciousness was the clearest it had been in recent times.
Mom, maybe you had a prophetic dream?
My aunt told my parents and asked them to keep an eye on me.
You! What were you trying to do to my daughter?
My father yelled at Sam.
No, it's a misunderstanding. Shut up. Are you trying to harm your pregnant wife? Do you want a divorce? Divorce? No, please.
Sam said, bowing to my father. I considered defending Sam because he was only trying to invite me out, and the timing was bad. But when I thought about explaining it to my parents, my grandmother's words came to mind. The child is afraid of Sam. The child is in danger. As I thought about it one by one, dots began to connect in my head. Sam, show me your phone.
Huh?
Sam responded foolishly. Ignoring his confusion, my father took his phone and I thoroughly checked it.
Hey, what are you doing?
Sam tried to take the phone back from me, but my father held him down. And I found the answer I was looking for. It was a conversation history with his lover. Frankly, I had a vague sense that Sam was cheating. After 5 years of marriage, it wasn't strange for such things to happen. But I trusted that he would do his duty as a father when the child was born, and didn't pursue it deeply. So why did I bring up his infidelity at this timing? It was because I sensed his intentions in his actions since I became pregnant. His attitude towards things he didn't care about before became nitpicky, and he even tried to prevent me from taking a break from my housework. And he even tried to approach me in an inappropriate timing. I assumed that the safe birth of our child was inconvenient for him. I looked at his phone, assuming that his infidelity was connected to his inconvenience. The name of his lover was Tess, and their conversation history was nauseatingly lovely-dovey. In it, there was even a plan for the two of them to run away with my inheritance when my grandmother died. They were just ridiculous. And apparently, Tess tried to end the relationship when Sam told her about my pregnancy. At this point, it became clear what Sam was up to. Sam, were you trying to prevent me from having a child? The reason you constantly caused me excessive stress was for that, right?
What? I would never.
So that you wouldn't have to break up with that woman named Tess, right? Sam falls silent, seemingly realizing the truth of my words.
What? Did you try to harm not only Dana, but also the child in her womb? You bastard! What the hell were you thinking?
My father grabs Sam by the collar and shakes him. I never thought that. In our 5th year of marriage, I would discover my husband's despicable side in this way. But now that I know, things cannot continue as before. I glare at Sam with contempt and delivery, my final words. I'm divorcing you. I cannot be with someone who cannot love the child. I don't care where you go, whether it's with Tess or anyone else. Of course, I'll be asking for compensation, so be prepared. I say this and leave with my parents, leaving my husband to hang his head in shame. Later on, I serve him divorce papers through a lawyer. As expected, he did not complain and accepted all of our terms. I seek compensation from both Sam and his lover Tess. Sam seems to have at least tried to get with Tess, but it seems that she had already lost interest in him. She paid me compensation in one lump sum and disappeared. As for what happened to my ex-husband after that, I have no idea. As long as he doesn't fall behind on his payments, I don't care about that man anymore. As for me, for now, I decide to return to my parents' house until my child is born. My baby is growing healthily inside me, and living with my parents is a huge relief. I express my gratitude to my grandmother for helping me, and apologize for having kept her away due to my lack of strength. My grandmother is still gazing at the garden, as usual, affected by her dementia. I wonder if she understands me. Feeling a little disappointed, I murmur to myself, and then, "Sweetheart, your child will grow up healthy." There was my grandmother, smiling at me and looking into my eyes. It was a brief moment, but I was sure that my grandmother understood me. "Yeah, thank you, Grandma. I'll raise a healthy child. I love you." I take my grandmother's hand, which was looking towards the garden again, and feel the warmth of the sunset next to her.